So welcome to the 2019 EECOM conference. Woohoo! Great to be here with you all. My name is Marcia McKenzie, and this is Karen McIver here beside me, and we're going to be opening this morning's session. We are grateful to be meeting on Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis, and have our meetings here on this land, and we're going to be welcomed in a few minutes to start by Elder Bertha Duquette, and we look forward to that and are grateful for you being here. We're also pleased to be greeted this morning by a number of officials from the Ministry of Education, the College of Education, and a student drum group from St. Francis McPherson School. So thank you all for joining us in recognition of the importance of climate change and environmental education for this province and country and beyond. This event follows over two decades of EECOM conferences. Still need to sort out when they started. I thought it was 95, but then Chuck Hopkins said 92 yesterday, so we'll have to get the official word on that maybe tonight from Adam. But since the early 90s anyways, EECOM has been the National Association for Environmental Education and Communication and provides an important role in bridging across provincial and territorial work in these areas. And one of the really important aspects is the meetings that are held each year to bring us all together across the work that we're doing in these areas. So thank you very much to the hardworking EECOM board and its current chair, Adam Young, and maybe if the board can just stand up so we know who you all are. So thanks, folks. So thanks for your hard work all around the year to keep this organization active and providing a home base for collaboration and action across the country. Karen and I are opening the event this morning as representatives of the co-hosting organizations for this year's conference and building on our collaboration of successful conferences in the past in 2013 and 2016. Karen is the past president of Sask Outdoors, and which is our fantastic provincial specialist association in outdoor and environmental education. And she's also responsible for Sask Outdoor Leadership on our wonderful journal, which hopefully you'll get a chance to check out this weekend if you haven't already, called Of Land and Living Skies, a community journal on place, land, and learning. So as co-hosts, we wanted to extend our thanks to Karen, as well as coordinator Leah Japp, board chair Sean Brandt, and the rest of the Sask Outdoor board for their work towards this event. So maybe if the Sask Outdoor board can stand up, and Leah. I think Leah may be over at registration, so you can thank her later. So we're excited here at the U of S to have also been able to work with EECOM and Sask Outdoors on this conference to have old and new colleagues and students from across the country here at the U of S, where myself and colleagues in the College of Education and our center, the Sustainability Education Research Institute, where we work daily. In fact, as a side note that I have to add in, we are pleased to be where Karen, Adam, and Sean have all done their Masters in Ed Foundations here at the U of S. So any prospective students in the crowd, you'd be in good company if you come join us here. And hosted out of Surrey also is the Sustainability and Education Policy Network, or SEPN, which also is a hosting organization for this event. Many of you have corresponded already with Nicolas Chopin, who is SEPN's project manager and who has been incredibly central to organizing this weekend's event. So Nicolas is at the back there. So a huge thank you to her and to Leah, as well as PhD student Kristen Hargis, who's out collecting her thesis data, so she's not able to be here, but she did tons of work in advance for all their behind-the-scenes work to get the event ready and the work they're doing the next couple of days. I also wanted to recognize my faculty colleagues, Janet McVitie and Alex Wilson in the College of Education for their planning and advisory work, and also Janet Scott Thompson and Sean Brandt for the coordination of the fabulous field trips that we have planned for this afternoon. So maybe if those folks can stand up if you're in the crowd. Awesome. Great. We would also like to thank our Golden Eagle sponsors, the U of S Conference Fund, the U of S Undergraduate Environmental Programs Office, the U of S College of Education and Tourism Saskatchewan for their generous funding. They have contributed to making this event possible, and we're really grateful for their support. There are many other sponsors, as you can see. It's been fantastic, and we'll be thanking them verbally as well in the sessions in the coming days. Thank you. Finally, thank you all for making the commitment to be here and taking the time out and coming together to meet in person, as well as for your contributions as chairs, as speakers, as keynotes, and more in the coming days. So now I'll pass it over to Karen to talk a little bit about the theme and around why we're meeting, on which we're meeting today. Thanks.
Good morning. So this event is the first ever national education conference with a theme focused on climate change education. We are proud to have this focus because we know that climate change is the most urgent issue facing global society, and that education and communication are central to motivating and enabling our collective capacity to act. It is such an important time to come together to talk about action on climate change through education across Canada and globally. Last year, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report warning that only 12 years remain to take significant action to keep a maximum of 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase from pre-industrial levels and reduce the likelihood of human and mass extinction. Climate change is already affecting human health through heat waves, flooding, spread of illnesses such as Lyme disease, which means ticks, causing significant species extinction, as we heard this week through the latest UN Intergovernmental Report, and generally impacting the ability of the Earth's ecosystems to sustain our physical, economic, social, and environmental needs. The world's children have responded to the urgency of this situation through the school climate strikes initiated by Greta Thunberg, with hundreds of thousands of students compelled to protest rather than attend school for a future that is so uncertain. Responding to the school climate strikes and related Extinction Rebellion protests earlier this month, lawmakers in the UK Parliament declared a state of environmental and climate emergency, making it the first country in the world to do so. They have committed the UK to net zero emissions by 2050. On May 1st, the EAUC, or the Alliance for Sustainability Leadership in Education, representing over 200 post-secondary educational institutions, followed suit in declaring climate emergency and recommending all their affiliated institutions to do the same and commit to a minimum target of net zero emissions by 2050. We have to take action now because, as Greta said, the 16-year-old Swedish climate activist, on her Twitter feed, we have to understand the emergency of the situation. Our leadership has failed us. Young people must hold older generations accountable for the mess they have created. We need to get angry and transform that anger into action. She said that on December 23rd, 2018. Here in Canada, children, youth, and community members have also been joining the school climate strikes. Over 100 students were at City Hall in Saskatoon last Friday, over 500 at the Legislative Building in Regina, and likewise strikes have also been held in cities, towns across the rest of the country over the past several months. We have to act now because Ada Deschen, a grade 7 student from Regina, states, "Climate change is important to kids because we will live with the effects the longest. Even though I can't vote or run for office yet, I still want people to notice that children care about climate change." She also says, "I am really scared about what the future could hold. I am worried that there will be more tornadoes, droughts, floods, and extreme weather events. I don't want people to die because of a thing that could have been stopped if people had taken it more seriously." It goes beyond the confirmed science. Children are scared. How we deal with climate change is a critical discussion in which teachers and students should be actively engaged. It will be children and youth who will be living with the effects of climate change for decades to come. And it will also be children and youth who will be solving the problems. And we, the responsible adults, should be supporting them and joining them. This is also an important issue for education governments and curriculum. Across Canadian post-secondary institutions, less than half have climate action or emission reduction plans. And aside from a few provinces, the situation is worse in K-12. A focus on climate change is not yet widespread in the curriculum at either level, and when included, tend to focus on learning the science of climate change rather than the action or behavioral and socio-emotional aspects we know are key to overcoming denial and hopelessness and enabling change. Although Canada is a signatory on the United Nations Convention Framework on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, which both include requirements to address climate change through education, most Canadian provinces and territories have not yet stepped up to help students and staff respond and cope with climate change and its impacts. We can't waste our time in the courts fighting a carbon tax, which, by the way, on May 3rd, just down the highway in Regina, a majority of the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal agreed that a price on carbon pollution is an essential part of the global effort to limit greenhouse gas emissions. We also know that here in Canada, Indigenous people are disproportionately affected by climate change. The people living most closely to the land experience the immediate losses and change of lifestyle, language, and culture. A 16-year-old Black Muslim climate activist from Minnesota named Isra Hirsi states, "This movement is not one person or one group. This movement is all of us, and we need to make sure we value those who are disproportionately affected by this crisis and allow those people who are affected to lead." And if we take a look at Cowessess First Nation, for example, we can see the incredible work that they are doing to lead the way with large-scale solar and wind power production. We are fortunate to have two of the founders of Idle No More speak with us tomorrow about the community education that sparked from the Indigenous leaders of the Idle No More movement. And Ariel Deranger from Indigenous Climate Action, who is creating capacity for Indigenous leadership on climate change solutions. In 2017, about 1/5 of the renewable energy projects in Canada were owned and operated by Indigenous communities, generating both clean power and jobs. We know that the transition to renewable energy can be a just transition, where society becomes more equal and sustainable at the same time. So thank you for joining us to discuss these important issues and how we can create increased capacity and action on climate change through education across our schools and communities. And to start us off well with our discussions of this important focus on Treaty 6 territory, we are very grateful to be joined by Elder Bertha Duquette. Elder Duquette is from Metasawas First Nation, Mistawasis First Nation, and she's the elder at St. Francis School, who will be having a drum group come after our keynote as well. And so we're very grateful to have you participate in this and kind of bring us a welcome.
Well, thank you very much for that welcome, Bertha. It was perfect, and we hope you'll come back again to the U of S. I'd next like to introduce the Dean of Education, Michelle Prytula. Just a few words in advance to sort of set the scene. This year, the University of Saskatchewan launched a new university plan, and we're very excited that sustainability is one of the key pillars of that plan. And that's building on a decade or more of work by the Office of Sustainability here at the university and other work that's been going on. So we're really excited to see how that rolls out in the different colleges and units across campus. Dean Michelle Prytula has been a supporter of the work of the Sustainability Education Research Institute, as well as the various activities we do, and also of our partner center in the College of Education, the Aboriginal Education Research Center. And in particular, she's been championing the work of our Indigenous faculty and students around Indigenous land-based programming. So we're very pleased to have you here to offer a greeting on behalf of the College of Education. Thank you, Michelle.
Tanshe, good morning, everyone. I have to admit, when Marcia opened up the conference this morning and there was a hoot from the crowd, I got especially excited. I don't often walk into conferences and everyone's as excited as that, so it is such an honor to be here and to speak just for a few moments to this crowd especially. So on behalf of the College of Education, I welcome you all to this place and space and do acknowledge that we are living and learning on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. And I want to thank all of you for joining us here at the U of S for this Action on Climate Change Through Education conference. I want to acknowledge the hard work of the conference organizers. I do understand the amount of work that goes into a conference like this. The members specifically of the Saskatchewan Outdoor Environmental Education Association, the Sustainability Education Policy Network, and our own SERI, Sustainability Education Research Institute, of which Marcia is the director. I acknowledge that work. I want to thank everyone for the vision and the work again that's gone into this conference. Specifically, though, I do want to commend the organizers for the focus on climate change education through collaboration. There are quite a few reasons why this focus is so important and so near and dear to my heart. Partnerships and collaborations, whether in teaching, in research, or in scholarship, have the power to expand our work in exponential ways. The impacts of effective collaborations in education are seen across sectors easily and quickly. Collaborations give us all new places and spaces in which we can work, in which we can increase our awareness and learning, but they bring scale to our work in ways that working alone just doesn't quite do. I've noticed that partners combine talent, energy, experiences, and infrastructure often that allows, again, this scholarship to grow in ways that it can't alone. And they push us often beyond our comfort zones, especially when we're open to learning from others who tend to work in different ways than we do. They stretch the boundaries of organizations, and for these reasons, I find the topic and the actual design of this conference so particularly exciting. When engaging in issues as important as climate change, you all, through this conference, are prioritizing the importance of education and partnerships across pre-K to 12, in higher ed, and in community, as well as partnerships with First Nations and Métis education. This makes the potential of this work so timely and limitless. Developing and advancing these partnerships, like Marcia said, are key within both the University of Saskatchewan's strategic plan as well as the College of Education strategic plan, and that is so exciting. So in looking at the pre-conference activities and the conference activities, the keynote sessions, the concurrent sessions, the topics, the formats, and the exhibits, the tours that you get to take, and other activities, I do believe that this conference will achieve its mission. I believe that it will make strong impact in increasing action on climate change through its design in bringing together educators, students, policymakers, researchers, and community members. As an added bonus, though, while engaging in this conference, you will be able to take a look and take in our beautiful U of S campus, as well as several places and spaces in and around Saskatoon, and I do trust that you will find that very enjoyable and that you will take in its beauty every single chance that you get on this beautiful treaty land. So it is with honor and pride and confidence that I welcome you here on behalf of the faculty and staff of the College of Education, and I wish you a wonderful, collaborative, and productive conference. Congratulations, everyone.
Now we'd like to welcome a representative from the Ministry of Education to bring greetings to the conference on behalf of the ministry and the government. It's Flo Woods. She is the Executive Director of Student Achievement and Supports Branch, and we're very grateful you could be here today while carrying your bicycle helmet.
I didn't just carry my bike helmet, I actually rode my bike. So good morning, everyone, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring greetings on behalf of the Ministry of Education. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I feel privileged that we are gathered here today on Treaty 6 land and the traditional homeland of the Métis. I make this acknowledgement out of a personal commitment to the importance of building and maintaining meaningful relationships. And I want to thank Elder Duquette for starting our day in a good way. Yeah, I'm not a very loud person. Next, I'd like to take a moment to thank the conference organizers and for inviting me to speak this morning. A lot of work goes into events like this, and when I looked at the conference, it's going to be exciting. I'd like to thank the co-hosts of the event, the Canadian Network for Environmental Education and Communication, Sask Outdoors, the Sustainability Education Policy Network, and the Sustainability Education Research Institute. I want to thank you all for the work that you do in not only for the contributions to this event, but also to the efforts that you make on a daily basis in regards to environmental education. This year's conference theme, Action on Climate Change Through Education, is timely and important for both educators, students, and for each of us in the room. The Ministry of Education has a deep interest in teaching students that the environment and climate change is important, and for this reason it is actually embedded in the curriculum in grades 1 to 12. We take pride in the fact that these topics come up regularly throughout the curriculum for both primary and secondary students, and that these topics span many disciplines. The environment and climate change specifically are taught in a variety of classes, such as social studies, the sciences, the English language arts, and environmental science elective 20. The fact that the environment spans so many fields of study speaks to how important the issue is, and as well the importance of engaging students in the discussion. In primary and secondary curricula, students are encouraged to consider First Nations and Métis worldviews regarding the environment, including the importance of the 4 elements and the need to respect Mother Earth. This is one of the many ways students get to see the topics from different perspectives. It is our duty as the generation that comes before to educate and to ensure that students can make informed environmental choices. We do this by providing educators with the proper tools to teach and by making sure there are opportunities to discuss, to question these topics in safe spaces. This conference is an important step in ensuring that those tools and opportunities are available. I hope that everyone in attendance takes away an additional nugget from what you had before and understand the importance that education plays in taking effective action to address climate change. Thank you to the educators in attendance for the guidance and leadership that you bring to your classrooms every day, and the work you do impacts students, allowing them to making it possible for them to make informed choices. Thank you also to students for taking an interest in an issue that will impact not only their lives, but the lives of their families, friends, and future generations. I wish you the very best for a successful conference, and I look forward to listening to Tim when he's coming up. And also, I wanted to say a special happy birthday, happy 50th birthday to Sask Outdoors. Thanks so much.
We were to have greetings from Carla Beck, the critic for education, early learning and childcare, and advanced education, and the deputy leader of the opposition. She was also, in the past, a school board trustee in Regina Public Schools. And she drove down from Saskatoon last night and woke up ill this morning and sends her regrets. So we're hoping to get a copy of her written remarks that we can share. And I get the honor to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Tim Swinehart. I'm super excited. Tim Swinehart teaches social studies at Lincoln High School and the Graduate School of Education at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. He teaches an environmental justice class, and his students engage in city politics, including showing up at City Hall with protest signs while testifying in favor of banning new bulk fossil fuel storage facilities in the city. They even got a photo op with the mayor. He is co-editor of A People's Curriculum for the Earth, Teaching Climate Change and the Environment Crisis, which includes classroom-ready resources. And we'll have copies in the exhibit hall by a local independent bookstore, Turning the Tide, who brought them in for purchase. Tim and his co-editor, Bill Bigelow, are the masterminds behind the United States' first comprehensive climate literacy policy, which was passed by the Portland Public School Board in May of 2016. For these reasons, we are excited that yesterday, Tim spoke to the City of Saskatoon's Environmental Advisory Committee, as well as to 2 city councilors and 75 grade 9 students who are involved in integrated environmental learning programs. He was the recipient of the 2015 Oregon Outstanding Social Studies Teacher of the Year Award, which we can see why, and he serves on the Portland Public Schools Climate Justice Committee. Tim spends his days off with his daughters, riding bikes, playing music, and making protest signs. He has inspired me as a classroom teacher, and I am thrilled to learn from him today. So thank you, Tim.
Just a minute for a technology break here. Okay, cool. There's plenty of battery left too, so that's good. Okay, and apologies to earlier presenters. I think this may have, it was set a little high to start with. Okay. I'll try not to spend a lot of my life hunching over, so I'm going to try not to do that this morning. All right, so, well, thank you, Karen. Thank you to conference organizers. It's such an honor to be here. In the last couple days that I've been here, I've had a chance to speak with a number of people involved in the conference, and it is clear what an incredibly dedicated and thoughtful group of environmental educators are in the room. And as a social studies teacher coming at this issue, this is actually the first environmental education conference that I've attended. I tend to operate in the circles of social justice education in the United States. And so I'm just really especially grateful to be here and to be learning from all of you as well. So I'd like to speak today about a couple of primary things related to environmental education. One is this idea of teaching for climate justice, and I think Karen's remarks really did a nice job of starting that conversation and why it's important that all environmental education at this moment that we live in is environmental justice education. Again, as Karen mentioned, we know that we're living in an age of emergency, and that the environmental crisis and the climate crisis specifically really unfolds in the world in profoundly unequal ways, with the people most affected often having done the least to cause it. And so, those stories are especially important. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the work that we've done in Portland for the last few years to pass, as Karen mentioned, the first climate justice education policy in the country, and to also work with students to really support their action, and why I think that they might just be our best chance of saving the planet at this point. So I wanted to start with kind of a land acknowledgement. I would also, and let me pause for a second, and also thank the elder for doing the land acknowledgement here in Saskatoon. I've This is the second conference that I've been to in Canada where it's obviously important. It has become a priority, and I feel like it's something that we still have a lot to learn in the United States from First Nations people here about the importance of acknowledging the land that we occupy that has been so often dispossessed from the original inhabitants of the land. And so I'd like to start by talking briefly about that, where I come from in Portland. So. And just telling a story actually from last weekend. Last Saturday, I was helping to facilitate an environmental justice tour of the Willamette River, which runs through Portland, Oregon. And we were leading an environmental justice tour of the Willamette, and specifically referring to it as a tour of the Willamette sacrifice zone. And that's not a term that you're familiar with. I imagine most folks are, but the way that I like to define that is that a sacrifice zone is a place where people and the planet are sacrificed in the name of profit. And we have examples of these everywhere we live, and they're often out of sight, as is this one in Portland. I have driven by these tank farms for much of my life and not paid them much attention. And it's just really within the last year, as a result of working with a lifelong environmental educator who is now really devoting her life to gathering the stories of this sacrifice zone and involving community members and teachers and students in these tours to go out and to tell the stories of, again, the way in which the ecology and the people of this place have been sacrificed in order to create what our city euphemistically refers to as an industrial sanctuary. Let that term sink in for a minute. Those are two words that should really never go right next to each other. But that's it. So a few of those stories that I've learned from someone who is an elder for me in our community, Sarah Taylor, who's leading these tours, that there are, again, that there are stories about how the ecology of this place was sacrificed as well as people over the years. So one thing to notice is that the Willamette River no longer looks like this picture on the left, where there is this expansive wetland area. This was referred to as Giles Lake. And it looked like that right up until probably the 1950s. The Willamette River was, I've been told that it was really no more than 6 feet deep at any point. It was sort of a braided river. And, you know, that there are stories from indigenous people that have inhabited this area since time immemorial that because of how shallow it was, that there was a point in time where people could walk across the backs of the salmon in the river, as, you know, as a story of sort of remembering what that was like. That was all. That land was all filled in in the 1950s to then make space for this industrial sanctuary. And initially it was kind of filled in with garbage, and then after that it was drained. And so now what we have is we have 95% of Oregon's fossil fuels passing through a place that's filled with sand, right on top of the Cascadia subduction zone, where geologists predict that, you know, we're likely any day to have this sort of, you know, giant, the big one, as they refer to it as Portland, which would, you know, of course, create an even larger sacrifice zone in this area, because it would destroy the ecology of the river for probably thousands of years. There are also important stories of people. I mentioned the native Northwest tribes that inhabited this area and gathered first foods and fish and berries in this area. And then eventually this also became housing for the many immigrant communities, including the large percentage of African Americans that moved to Portland during the Second World War to work in the shipbuilding industry. And so there was a housing area here that was, even prior to the Civil Rights Movement, was an integrated, not not sort of legally, but just informally, an integrated housing community. And there are all these incredible stories that Sarah has found. People who have grown up now that remember playing baseball with all the kids from the community. And those houses, again, were all demolished when the area was filled in, and it was sort of prepared to become this industrial sanctuary. So I talk about all of this just to sort of bring the place that I'm from, to bring that here with me a little bit, and to talk about, again, why it is that telling these stories of place is part of what I think we need to be doing in this moment. Part of our environmental justice tour with teachers was talking about how we don't just teach about fossil fuels in this moment that we're living in, but how we teach against fossil fuels in this moment. This is an energy terminal that should not be expanding, but is. Well, I'll have a slide in just a moment that refers to the first in the nation ban on future fossil fuel infrastructure that the Portland City Council passed in 2017. Zenith Energy has found a way to increase their terminal fourfold, and they're now receiving trains from the Canadian tar sands to load onto ships in Portland to export to Asia. And that's something that we said no to in Portland 3 years ago, but they've sort of found a loophole. And they're trying to do it anyway, but I don't think they're going to. I've got a slide in a couple minutes that points the direction toward why. So another thing that I wanted to do to just sort of ground my talk in place here was to connect where I'm from to where we are now. And by doing that, one thing that we can see on this map of the fossil fuel, sort of primary fossil fuel areas in the Western North America, is the way in which, you know, there is this economic sort of connection of sacrifice zones, right? Between the Alberta tar sands, the Bakken oil shale, the Powder River coal basin. And, you know, and it's worth noting again that all of these are located near or on indigenous lands that the people, again, leading the fights and the resistance against these projects are almost always indigenous folks that are putting themselves on the front lines and really sort of leading the way for the rest of us to step up in that what is also a network of resistance. And so to start to get into teaching a bit about these issues, one thing I wanted to share here was that a few years ago, a group of us we wanted to begin to figure out how do we bring this activism that's happening, these incredible stories of resistance, to help to show students that there is a movement out there. So this activity, Teaching Blockadia, which it's available, one resource that I want everybody to know about is called the Zen Education Project. And if you haven't checked that out before, it's a wonderful resource for, I should have had it on the slide, I apologize, but it's a great resource for kind of U.S. history teaching, progressive, kind of social justice oriented, it is quite U.S. centric, but there is a new page there called Teaching for Climate Justice that the Zen Ed Project we sort of just started this initiative, and they're free, downloadable, classroom tested role plays and activities, all kind of geared around this idea of teaching for climate justice. And so Teaching Blockadia is one of the pieces of curriculum that we wrote to bring these stories into the classroom. So to story the people near the Powder River coal basin, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the Northern Cheyenne. The Northern Cheyenne Indian tribe there that has been so instrumental in fighting that project. Connecting that to the Beaver Lake Cree up around the Alberta tar sands that have also played a really important role resisting that project. And connecting that with groups around the world that are sort of creating this movement to fight and imagine a different world. Speaking of imagining a different world, this is a quote that I ran across a few years ago, and I pull it out at some point during the year with my classes, just kind of whenever it seems appropriate. And so it reads that it's now easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. And usually the first response from students is, yep. You know, I don't get any kind of, nobody really calls that into question. They just, this is how they have, this is how we all, I think, and especially the students that we're teaching, have been trained to think. That those fossil fuel tanks next to the Willamette River, that they're permanent, that they'll be there forever, that these sacrifice zones that have been created in the lands of the Beaver Lake Cree, of the Northern Cheyenne, that they're going to be there forever. And of course, we know that this isn't true logically, but somehow it feels like that's the case. And so I think part of our job as environmental educators is to figure out ways to help our students imagine, for one, the end of these sacrifice zones. So how do we begin to imagine those ending and then creating something different? And I think that's our task in the moment that we're living in, is to work in every way that we can to build their power to imagine a different world. And so I wanted to share just real quickly. This is from a couple, Karen mentioned the Extinction Rebellion. There's a local Extinction Rebellion group in Portland. So this is back at the Zenith Energy Terminal. You can see the rail cars filled with tar sands crude behind them, waiting to be loaded onto ships. For the last, not this Sunday, but the 2 Sundays before that, there have been a group of Portlanders, the local Extinction Rebellion. They've shown up at about 5 o'clock in the morning with a dump truck load full of dirt that they then proceed to dump on the railroad tracks to block the trains that are trying to come in. And 2 Sundays in a row, they planted a victory garden on top of the railroad tracks. Yeah, right? And, you know, I think in a small way, this kind of thing helps us to imagine that this isn't permanent, that these sacrifice zones can come to an end, and that we can imagine, and actually part of their action is calling for the city of Portland to rezone this area into a green space. You know, and that's a big ask, but this is a small step towards that process of imagining that. A good friend and colleague and mentor of mine, Jan, is in one of these photos, and so she's been arrested each of the last 2 Sundays with a small group of people for trespassing on the railroad tracks. And you know, and again, that I think that's just, it's so inspiring to me that this group of people is out there doing this and helping to kind of build this story of a different way to move forward. So probably, I guess 10 years ago, when my co-editor of A People's Curriculum for the Earth, Bill Bigelow, and I started thinking about how to teach about the environmental crisis. One of the things that we knew as social studies teachers that we had to do was to story this crisis that we're in. And by that, I mean, how do we bring the stories of the people that are most affected by the environmental crisis, as well as the people that are leading the movements to create a different world? How do we bring those most effectively into our classrooms? And so we started doing that in a way that Bill has used for decades very effectively, which is to write activities, role plays, and simulations that put students in the position of some of these people and places around the world, and to bring the movements into classrooms. It's not, I'm going to talk a little bit about also taking our students out to the movement and getting out of the classroom, but that's not always possible. So there are, I think, really effective ways that most people can bring movements into their classrooms and help students really see those. And to begin, and I think just one note here too, in terms of collective action, I think one of our challenges as well, at least one of the challenges with the students I work with, is that when they come to my environmental justice class, you know, we're studying these global issues, and we start talking about solutions. They have, again, in terms of being trained as consumers within a capitalist system and not so much as citizens, their first response is how do we buy our way out of this, right? So, you know, how do I buy green? How do I shop organic? You know, in sort of individual actions, riding my bike, recycling. Those things are important, all right? We all know that those are important, but again, in terms of acknowledging the moment that we're living in, I think we're seeing with every passing day how insignificant those individual actions truly are to measuring up to the scale of the crisis and the moment that we're in. And so I think part of our job too, and part of the things one of the things that I have really tried to do over the last few years is to get kids to think collectively, to sort of flex a civic muscle, if you will, and to move from thinking about action as individuals, as they have been trained so well to think, to thinking about acting in collectives, in social groups, as part of a movement. And it's hard because they have not been asked to think like that all that often. It's something that's new for them. They have to stretch their brains. They have to kind of stretch the way they're thinking. And so that is one of the things then, again, that we've tried to do through some of the curriculum that we've written, including curriculum that is in People's Curriculum for the Earth, as well as some of the curriculum that we've developed since then that's available at the Zen Education Project website that I mentioned. A couple of examples that are in the book, which I hope you get a chance to check out if you're able. One is a role play on the first Indigenous Peoples Climate Summit that was held in Anchorage, Alaska in 2009. And it was the first time that globally that Indigenous groups had come together to talk about both the way that they were being affected in the places that they live by climate change, as well as the ways in which they wanted to respond and what was really important for the world to know about the ways that they were being affected. And so students they take on those roles in sort of a summit setting. And write, one of the things to start to get students into that is to write what we call an interior monologue from the perspective of this role that they are taking on, to try to sort of put some flesh and bones on the role, to make it human, and to sort of, to begin to learn sort of through that empathetic capacity that they have if we're able to tap into that. And then to teach each other. And those are some of my favorite days in the classroom when once they've sort of built their roles and they're moving around the room in sort of a summit style, talking to each other. And I kind of get to sit back and watch and listen and know that good things are happening in the room that day. And so, I've really become a firm believer in this, as one sort of pedagogical tool to, again, bring those kind of social movements into class and help kids start to think about the ways that they can see themselves as part of these social movements. One other one just worth mentioning here real quick is just the group La Via Campesina. If you're not familiar with that group, it's the largest social movement in the world that no one has ever heard of, it turns out. It's not in very many textbooks, but it's a 200 million strong group of small peasant farmers around the world. And they are as diverse as you can imagine, coming from all different parts and places of the world, but they really all come together around the idea of food sovereignty and having control of local economies and the ability of people to appropriately and sovereignly produce the food in the places where they live, sort of without the influence of multinational agribusiness corporations and World Trade Organization patent rules and everything else that ends up playing into global food system today. So that's another role play where kids come together and kind of struggle with some of those issues, and then act in solidarity. That one actually finishes, the La Via Campesina role play finishes with kind of a mock protest at a conference, like a kind of a global conference of elite folks that are inside, and then the students representing the La Via Campesina's farmers are outside. And so they prepare speeches and they make protest signs, and that's sort of how that culminates, which is also, I think, there's a point worth making that I take from my mentor, Bill Bigelow, and co-editor, which is that, this is grim stuff that we're teaching about, right? These issues are heavy. As you said, they're scary. But at the same time, I think one thing that I've learned from Bill and through the work that we've done here is that teaching about this doesn't always have to be grim, right? That there are ways that teaching seriously about the climate crisis can also be playful, that it can be creative, that it can be imaginative. And so that's one of the things also that we try to embody in some of the curriculum that we write, is to bring all of that, hopefully, to the ways that, that students are thinking about these issues and interacting with each other. So that brings us to the reason why there are a bunch of papers placed awkwardly near you on your seats. I would be remiss if I just stood up here and talked for the entire time, especially as someone trained as a Rethinking Schools educator. So we're going to do an activity. Maybe just to ask for, I know that there are some folks that are sitting in the back that might not have roles, and just as you would not make it through my classroom without a role, you're not going to make it through this keynote without a role. Okay. Is there anyone who doesn't have a role? We can make sure to get one to you. Please raise your hand if you don't have a role. Okay. There should be plenty to go around. So just as a quick intro to this activity, this is my colleague at Lincoln, who I teach geography with, Matt Reed, and I wrote this just in the spring. And our intention with this was to bring to the classroom just a fraction of the incredible stories, the just beautiful, creative, inspiring stories of this growing global climate justice movement. And again, I think, it is heavy to consider the full weight of this moment that we live in. It is also so inspiring to start looking at some of these stories, because there is one of the most profound responses in terms of social movements that I think the world has ever seen growing up to meet the challenge that we are currently facing. And so what we did was to find 28 stories of people largely in North America, but some from different places in the world, and to try to also feature quite a few youth. Because as Karen, I think, did such a nice job focusing on, they're quickly becoming our leaders at this point. So what I would like to ask you to do, if you have not yet, is to take a minute to read your role. And we're not going to kind of go through the full activity here today, but I wanted you to get a flavor for it. So what you'll be doing in just a minute is we'll get up and you'll talk to, you're going to have conversations with 2, maybe 3 people kind of separately near where you're at, because we can't kind of move around in here the way that we normally would in a classroom. But your responsibility is going to be to share what's most interesting about your role, what's most inspiring about your role, what action is this person taking to address the climate crisis, how are they working in solidarity with other people, sort of, whatever it is that stands out to you. So why don't we take just a couple minutes here again for people to look at that, and to, if you have something to write with, you could underline a couple things that you'd like to share with other folks in just a moment. Okay, so we'll take a couple minutes for people to read. It sounds like enough people are ready that we can go ahead and get started. So, in the classroom, it's probably worth just sharing a couple of these things. When we do this type of activity, a mixer, there's the first mixer that we wrote was just called the climate change mixer, I think, which is in a people's curriculum for the earth, and it's one of the activities that I think folks have used most from that book, sort of as an intro to the way in which people are being affected mostly around the world by climate change. And again, kind of in those ways that are so unequal, right? Even though this is a global issue, that it's not, that it sort of affects everyone, right? It's not affecting everyone equally. But in the time since, I think that, also in terms of bringing social movements into the classroom, one of the things that, that I've had in the back of my mind, and I'm so thankful to my teaching partner, Matt, for really helping with this year, is that these stories are just as, if not more important, than those stories of how people were affected for this moment that we're living in. Because these stories that we're looking at today point a way forward for students. To look at, okay, so here's how someone is concretely taking action to address the crisis and to move their community forward, to move a group of people forward. So anyway, that was, again, kind of the intention for this. So what that all is to say that doing this in the classroom, I would ask students to share their stories and to speak in for this activity, speak in the I voice, to introduce yourself and to really take on this character. Hi, I'm Henry Red Cloud from the Lakota Reservation, and here's what I'm working on. And to do that respectfully, right? Because these are all real people, real folks doing real work in the world. So anyway, that's, those are a couple of the things to share with kids. So I would just ask you all now, and they would usually have a kind of a note-taking sheet to kind of like keep track of what they're talking to and kind of categorize things. But we don't have time for that, and I thought that you could have conversations without that. So if you could try to just have conversations with one other person to start with. And again, I kind of encourage kids to do that too, because they have the most sort of meaningful conversations that way. So if you can start with one person that's next to you, but then in a minute we'll get up and talk to someone else next to you. And then if we have time, maybe we'll shoot for 3 conversations so you can get a flair for just a few of the different people that are around you. And just share your stories with one another. So, okay. Why don't you, go ahead and start with the person next to you, and then we'll get up in a minute. Thank you for returning to your seats. I just learned that I made a little bit of mistake in my thinking in terms of the timing. I was up here thinking that I still had all this time left, and it turns out that I don't. So I'm going to try to wrap up. Okay, so I'm going to try to wrap up in 10 minutes here. We will, in the interest of that, we're going to skip the part where I sort of take comments about what you found inspiring, from this. But I hope that that's something maybe that you are able to talk with folks, as the conference goes on, if you have a chance to talk about that. Just a quick plug here at the Zen Education Project, because this activity is in draft form. If you register and go online and comment on this, now that you have participated, I might have to see if it says technically that you're supposed to have taught it, but this is probably close enough. I think, or you could go a step further and actually teach it, but I think you can select from a group of kind of environmental climate justice related books that they'll send you. So, okay. So bear with me if I start talking a little more quickly than I have been. We about 3 years ago realized that it was important to be bringing this curriculum into the classroom, but that just doing this in our own classrooms wasn't enough. And so at a meeting where we did a similar activity like this with people from the local climate justice organization in Portland, 350 PDX, we brainstormed the idea of writing a climate justice resolution to pass through the Portland Public School District. We met for months, a group of teachers, students, community members, to write this resolution, and then with one champion on the school board, brought it before the Teaching and Learning Committee, and then went to the school board several times to kind of garner support. And eventually, in May of 2016, passed what we're pretty sure is the most comprehensive climate justice education policy in any school district in the United States. And I wanted to just share a little bit of the language from that with you. So the kind of the primary part of the resolution directs the superintendent in collaboration with PPS students, teachers, and community members to develop an implementation plan so that there is curriculum and educational opportunities that address climate change and climate justice in all Portland public schools. One element of that we end up citing probably the most is this language about activism and civic engagement. And so another part of it reads that all Portland Public School students should develop confidence and passion when it comes to making a positive difference in society and come to see themselves as activists and leaders for social and environmental justice. And it's worth just emphasizing that that language is official school district policy where I teach. So as a teacher, you know, when I have the chance to take my students to City Hall to advocate for a fossil fuel ban, I'm teaching what I'm supposed to be teaching. And we've heard stories from across the district that this has been empowering in all sorts of ways for science teachers, social studies teachers, elementary teachers, a whole broad variety of people who say that they feel like they can teach about the climate crisis now in the way that they want to because they have the support of the resolution behind them, and at least in theory, the school district. But if I can get to one of my last slides, we're also having a little bit of trouble with our administration fully implementing at this point. So this is a great sign from the school climate strikes in Australia, responding to Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who said, we want more, what we want is more learning in schools and less activism in schools. Probably the next week, students showed up with that sign. Karen mentioned a few years ago that I did have a chance to take my environmental justice class to City Hall to give testimony, deliver petitions to, this was former Portland Mayor Charlie Hales there on the right, hearing testimony from some of my students. And again, in terms of making this playful, we also sang him a song. So, that was, it was one of those moments where, as a teacher, I had never envisioned myself doing something like this as a social studies teacher. I didn't grow up an activist. I grew up in like a real quiet part of, like in the woods. I used to just spend a lot of time sitting on a hammock, like looking up at the trees. I didn't imagine that I would be doing stuff like this with high school students. And so again, I think the importance of having that language of the school district policy really helped with that. Also led eventually, not our school district policy, but it's just, I shared this with the students yesterday at Saskatoon City Hall, that we now have a Portland Youth Climate Council, which is a formal body of City Hall to give students, so that they're not just showing up to give testimony anymore and just kind of showing up, in that way, but as a legitimate youth voice in city government to comment on the climate crisis. And then one last piece of the resolution that I wanted to make sure to share with people is this focus on frontline communities. And so the language around that in the resolution is that Portland Public Schools commits itself to drawing on local resources to build climate justice curriculum, especially inviting the participation of people from frontline communities, which have been the first and hardest hit by climate change. And one of the ways that we have tried to do that is through working the last couple of years with a poet, internationally known poet from the Marshall Islands named Kathy Gentno-Kitchener. If you're not familiar with her work, be sure to check her out. Her poems are a real testament to the way that climate activism, the stories of frontline communities, and the climate crisis kind of all wrap themselves together into a very creative form of art and resistance. I was going to share this poem especially with you, Dear Famata Fele Penum, but we'll skip over that in the interest of time. But she did participate with close to 2,000 Portland Public School students over the last couple years, workshops with hundreds of teachers and thousands of students to engage them in these poetry writing workshops, where she's telling the stories of how climate change is affecting the Marshall Islands, and also how the climate warriors of the Pacific Island region have again been some of the people leading the resistance while on the front lines. So I think the last thing that I'd like to share is that as a result of this forum that we held, where youth from the Klamath River Basin in Oregon came up to share their stories about a liquefied natural gas project that was proposed in their area, then they met with Portland youth that one of my students, when we had a chance to go to the state capitol for a Clean Air Lobby Day, had written this poem. And this was being inspired by, having been inspired by Kathy Jetno-Kitchener through the work that sort of was, the climate justice resolution had inspired, and then had a chance to read this poem to Governor Kate Brown while we were there. And I'd like to just play just a little bit of this, because this was ranked right up there with one of my prouder moments as a teacher.
Of Hurricane Katrina, and says we need to wake up. Because Hurricanes Harvey and Irma are in far too many headlines to ignore. Because there's flooding in Texas, Florida, Long Island, Puerto Rico. Because in Houston, water drips from broken ceilings like tears. Because in Syria, the only water is the tears streaming down refugees' faces as they are forced to leave their home, the result of a drought-induced civil war. Because Hurricane Katrina was over 10 years ago, and people are still forced to choose whether to rebuild or retreat, because I am reminded that choice is a privilege. Naomi Klein states the scientific facts of climate change allow one to choose how they will react, and many still insist on blatantly disregarding these facts. In 2017, Trump states that climate change research is a waste of money. Trump, I urge you to tell that to Mika Mayava, who wakes up every morning to realize the shoreline of the island he calls home is consistently receding. Tell that to Feifei, a young girl in Beijing who can't leave her house without a pollution mask. Tell that to Danielle, who lives in fear of the Pacific Connector pipeline destroying the river that runs near her home, the river that is her everything. Because we need to wake up. The US pulls out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Wake up. Media commentators speak of compassion fatigue. Since when does compassion have a limit? Wake up. An anti-environmental politician pounds his fist on a table. It shakes. The whole world shakes. Wake up. Because we won't rest until ash ceases to swirl in the sky like raindrops, until the only water rushing is glistening through streams, waterfalls, rivers, oceans, until we shift from caring about paychecks to caring about people. Until we can see empathy, dripping like honey, swinging from trees, spreading like ice in the Arctic, until we can lay on the earth and let compassion encircle us like a blanket of blue sky.
Wow, that's fabulous.
So I will just finish. I still get a little choked up listening to that. I think that our students have, in this moment, they have this incredible moral authority that even we don't have as adults, right? We've messed up in a lot of ways, right? We're leaving this to them. And so they're the ones with the moral authority to tell the governor, to tell the school board, to tell city council, to tell the people in power that make decisions that they need to wake up, right? That they need to take action. And so I think that that is one of the most profound things that we can be doing as environmental educators today, is supporting that activism, supporting their moral authority, and really following their lead. And I'm just going to finish. I promised my daughters that I would fit them into the slideshow, so this will be my last slide. This is my daughter, Zadie, and my younger daughter, Mira, at the sit-in at Portland Public Schools on March 15th. I mentioned that we've been having some trouble with our new batch of administrators in Portland implementing our resolution, and so as part of the school climate strike on the 15th, there were several hundred students that decided to march to the district office and occupy the parking lot for a couple hours, and I couldn't have been more pleased. So I know I'm over time. I apologize for that. Thank you so much for listening today, and as I think Greta Thunberg would tell us, let's go out there and teach like the house is on fire, because it is, and that's our job. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that really inspiring talk and for all the work that you and your students are doing on a daily basis in Portland.